Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dragon Con Urban Fantasy Track. I am joined today by the fabulous friend of the track, Delilah Dawson. I have a bunch of questions for Delilah, which she has a number of things to actually ask her about. And I've got a whole stack of things next to me as well. So hopefully they will not all of a sudden topple over onto the screen.
And that's how Carol died.
Exactly.
Buried under a pile, under your giant binder of questions.
That's right. Either some of the notebooks, or yes.
Well, see, the thing is, maybe people watching don't know, but if you've ever been on a panel with Carol, like, she doesn't show up to a panel like, oh, we're just going to take somebody's question. She shows up and she's like, whoop, and there's like posted, like, there's questions and there's references and that was on page 12. So yeah, it's amazing.
Oh, well, I thank you. And I look forward to when we get to do this again in person someday, because
there's no chocolate on my table in front of me. There's no
milk. That can't be right. I mean, something just doesn't feel right. So yes, in order to give people an introduction to you, what I'm going to talk about are all the different things that you've written. And if you don't mind, I've kind of come to think of you while going through all of your many, many works, that I came up with this Jill of all genres idea in my mind, and I hope that is okay for you.
I get around.
And it's it's very impressive, the body of work. So what I want to do is ask a kind of a general question first that typically I do ask just about anyone who writes in this genre, and then we will demonstrate all the many things you have written by going down the long list. But first off, when did you first become interested in fantasy and sci-fi?
I mean, I remember being 6 or 7, and on Sundays at 3 o'clock on Channel 46, they would just be movies, and I would watch whatever it was with my dad, whether it was Kroll or Piranha, but it was always something kind of sci-fi, and it was always something there. Like, we always watched things like that. And as I got older, and I got into reading. I was a big reader. Like, I found things like The Last Unicorn or Willow or, Labyrinth. Like, you can kind of trace my little moments in life. And I was like, oh my God, I like that. Oh my God, I like that. Like, today I went to vote Georgia at the library. And I was like, oh, this is the library where I discovered Mists of Avalon. And I was reading the second Thomas Covenant book. And I was like, whoop, bye, Thomas. Let's read about ladies. So there's always been that in my life. And then, I mean, if you're going to straight up urban fantasy, the time that I remember it really coming to the fore for me was my friend Larry and Jennifer were getting married, and I had to sit in their house for a couple of hours, and they were like, oh, you can just grab something in the library, because this is before cell phones were everywhere with like a supercomputer, and they're like, oh, just grab something. There's a book on top you might like, Dead After Dark. And so I'm trapped in these people's house for 2 hours, and I'm like, Dead After Dark, who's this Charlene Harris? And I start reading it, and I'm like, oh my God, I didn't know we were allowed to write redneck vampires. This is amazing. Tell me more about this, Eric. Like, before that, I didn't really know what urban fantasy was, and that book really cemented it for me.
Okay. Well, and that's a really good introduction too. I mean, that's a great way to, kind of ease into the genre in general. Now, your first books that you published that people will probably have, if they've been following you all along, they're aware of the Blood series. And I just happen to have copies of them here. So I'm going
to full set, including the special out of print Wicked as She Wants.
Oh, well. Oh, and I love that book so much. I love them all, but I love, and I got to admit, I have the cover proof that you gave me long ago of this one, and it's still in my Dragon Con notebook. I carried around for inspiration. In any case, so can you give us kind of give people kind of an introduction if they're not familiar with the series, the concept behind it, kind of how it got going, that sort of thing.
Sure. So it's steampunk, vampire, Victorian clockwork circus caravan time or portal world. It's a lot of stuff. It's just about a woman from our world, a hospice nurse who ends up transported to this other world that's kind of a alt universe Victorian England, where there are these people who aren't vampires, but they're called bloodmen, but they are basically carnivores that feed on humans. So they have kind of all the traits of a vampire, except for the magical ones. So like they drink blood, but they can't fly.
Right.
They don't have to go to a coffin at night. They can be out in the sunlight, but like straight up the only thing that they do is drink human blood. But then other than that, they live perfectly normal lives, and have sexy times.
Yeah. And it's not only people.
Oh yeah, the
It's
animals. There are animals that are also blooded. There are animals that drink blood. So like I think in the second book, there's a fight between like a blood drinking peacock and a unicorn.
right.
There are blood camels that carry blood in their humps. There are blood horses. But I guess what we know the best are the blood bunnies, which are, kind of Monty Python rabbits with teeth. So you're just walking around and a rabbit comes up, you're like, oh, a bunny. And he's like,
Well, and here's the thing. When I read the first book, these many years ago, I when I would go for a walk in my neighborhood and I would come across all kinds of little woodland creatures running around. Anytime a rabbit went by me, or that was out I could hear them out there and I'd look and I would be like, oh, I'd have to think twice. I realized that it's a fantasy world, but there was that. Now there was a description that Demi makes in Wicked After Midnight, where she calls it a peculiar parallel universe, and I thought that was an interesting, characterization of the world, and also of the first three books. What I liked also is that you take, kind of different perspectives. The first one is told from the perspective of someone new to the world, and that makes sense because you're introducing it. But then the second one is told from the perspective of one of the natives to that world. And then after that, we get someone who was one of the strangers, which is what they call the people who end up there just mysteriously, right? The humans who somehow are transported there. And so, but she is changed. We won't go into all the details, but was that something that you set out to do purposely, or did it just kind of organically occur that was how the perspectives were set out?
I mean, it's all kind of happy accidents and serendipity. Like the first book, I knew what it was, and I knew I needed someone from our world going over there so we could have the introduction. The second book, I pitched several different ideas, but what it ended up being was taking an almost love triangle character from the first book, and I was just very curious about where he'd come from, and I liked the character, so I decided to send him off on an adventure. And I don't even remember what the idea was, where the female love interest is basically kind of like Princess Anastasia, but a bloodthirsty vampire. I'm sure I'd probably, like my kids, I'd had to watch Anastasia with them once and was like, oh my God, what could make this more interesting? But I do know that the first line of Wicked as She Wants, like the first line in the first paragraph, like were unchanged from the first draft. I just knew that book, which it's won a bunch of awards, so it's kind of my most winningest book probably, but I knew from the start exactly, what that book was about and who it was about, and I knew the characters very firmly. And then, yeah, the third one was the whole series. You're in this kind of traveling clockwork circus, so like a whole bunch of trains, where everybody has their little train, and then they circle the trains and do a carnival basically. So I wanted to take some of those characters and play with them, but I wanted to get it over to France because I love Moulin Rouge. When that movie came out, I was pretty obsessed with it, so that was the goal there. Then there's also the 3 novellas too that take place in that world, so I had a lot of time to play there and to because it was all different couples, I got to kind of pull from here and pull from there and then kind of invent people to fulfill them.
Right, right. Whatever particular aspect you wanted to explore at any given time, you could do that. Now, there's when, back in the days when I used to be a book reviewer, these many years ago as well, um, in my review of Wicked as She Wants, one of the comments that I made, or statements, I suppose, that I think is also a good description of what the world was like to me, is it says that Dawson depicts a world both fantastical in its origin and scope, yet gritty and realistic in its execution. And I think that applies to all of them, to all of the books in the series, but and I think that that's one reason it has such an appeal. I know that this was kind of a springboard to other things. And when after that series, and I know, and I do understand that not all of these are in the order that they were necessarily written, but as they came out and sort of came into their own, you moved into the YA area for a while with first Servants of the Storm, which is,
Oh, I love that cover.
Yeah, that is a great cover. I mean, it's such a fabulous book. And then you had Hit and Strike right here.
It's like a family reunion. Look at all my babies.
There they are, yes. So you've had and they're very different from one another, because Servants is pretty much, I would say, straight up urban fantasy, or with a lot of horror, but the lines between the two can be smudged fairly often as it is. And then with Hit and Strike being different. But first, let's go to Servants and talk about that. Again, kind of give us the background on it, and like the basic premise, I guess you should say, and we'll go from there.
I think of it as Southern Gothic horror. My husband is from Savannah and I'm from Georgia. So we went to Savannah a lot when I was a kid. And I've just always felt like Savannah was super evil underneath it. And, it's not what you see in Forrest Gump of these beautiful squares when you are there with someone who was born there and they take you down the side streets and you start to learn about it. Like, it's a pretty dark place. And then as you kind of delve into the history, you're like, oh my God, this whole town is built out of blood and bones. Like, it's got a tremendously tragic history. I will give the caveat, I don't talk about Servants of the Storm as much these days. It was written with the main character who is of mixed race. The book was written in like 2012. I had a reader to kind of make sure that it was okay. But today I would not write a book with a character of a different race and some of the race issues in Savannah. I don't think that's my place. That was a different time. So if you are very sensitive to that and you want to skip this book, that's okay. But that being said, yeah, it was all about Savannah. I saw this photo set of Six Flags New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and it was just enrapturing. I was like, oh, I'm going to make up. I don't want to delve into other people's actual tragedies, so I will make up my own hurricane in Savannah and make my own fake amusement park there. And so it's about a girl who loses her best friend in a hurricane and then sees her best friend running downtown and has to stop the medication her parents have asked her to take in order to find out what's real, and what's real is demons.
Surprise!
Surprise, it's demons.
Yes. And from my review of that book, I stated that it was filled with thrills, chills, and surprises. And I would say that that's also a good assessment of the book. And I think that it's, even though it was written as a YA, I think it does have adult appeal as well. I mean, as any good book should, have that kind of attraction. So anyway, it is very interesting, and we'll show the cover once more since it's so cool. Yeah, that is a great cover.
Love that cover.
Now, what can you tell us about Hit and Strike?
Sure. So Hit and Strike, it's a duology. They were based on back when we didn't have our music on our phones, you had to have your iPod. And so I had this idea of, what if in the terms of service you have to agree to, anything we do, you have to, is for credit cards or whatever, you have to do the terms of service. And so I was like, okay, well, what if, and we all just agree to it. 'Cause you're like, okay, well, if I don't agree to this terms of service, then, I have to throw my iPod away. I can't use it, or I can't sign this, house lease or whatever, or I can't get a credit card or open a bank account, but we can't read every word or understand. I was like, what if they hid in there, like, we can straight up kill you if you don't pay your debts?
What if?
Of course it would be worded like very, very carefully. But so in this world, something has bought up a bunch of America's debt and is tapping the children of debtors to get rid of the loose ends. So basically this girl just one day wakes up and there's an envelope, a gun, a list of 10 names. And it's like, either you tap them to become debtors themselves, or we kill you and your mom. So, it's kind of like that in that Hunger Games era where we were able to say, sure, that could happen.
Right.
I was living in Woodstock, Georgia at the time. So it kind of all happened up and down Highway 92. But it's about this girl wrestling with, how far she'll go to save her and her mom. And then she starts to realize that like the names on the list maybe aren't all coincidences. And she picks up a boyfriend and a fat Labrador on the way.
Yes. And that one, I described in my review of that one, is that it was not for the faint of heart. And I still stand by that as well, that I think your description of it gives people a pretty good, very clear understanding of what's going to happen. And even though it was, I think the book came out in 2015, is that correct? Yeah. And I said it was a relentless ride through a nightmarish vision of a world that seems all too possible. And that could kind of still hold, right? So those two are dealing with something that, as you said, you got inspiration for, based on something else. And, well, what if these terms of service could be like that? And hey, it just goes to show that nothing's impossible, right? I mean, always read the fine print.
Yeah, that's the tagline. I will say about those books, like they're very violent, but a thing that kind of ties all of my books together is that I don't treat trauma lightly. Even in my fast-moving books, even in my romance books, I am a victim of. I grew up in domestic violence, and I've been a rape victim, and I've dealt with some trauma. So when these books, like when this person, in Hit, when she kills somebody, she's not like, oh, well, guess I'll go get some donuts. Like she's on the ground shaking, So it's not, the book isn't an issues book. It's not dominated by that. But if you're someone who throws the book across the room when you're like, you just killed 5 people, like, and they punched you in the face and like, you're not even bleeding. You're not even in shock. Like my characters go through, realistic situations. And part of that world is, especially when you get to Strike and she meets some other kids who have had the same thing happen to them, you get to see how different people deal with crazy circumstances in healthy ways and not so healthy ways. And if you like Boyd Crowder from Justified, there's a villain inspired by him in Strike.
Oh, okay. There you go. You hear that, Justified fans? So you got something else to look forward to. Well, and then next we have a series of 4 books, that the Shadow series. And interestingly, people might notice that this is not your name down here. Can you?
It's not.
Why? It's you, but it's not your name. How did that come about?
Well, up until that point, all of the Blood books and all of my YA books were all with Simon & Schuster imprints, and Wake of Vultures sold to Orbit at Hachette. And so They were basically like, well, would you consider taking on a pen name? It's a very different kind of book. It's a different publisher. We want the kind of benefit of, you get little debut benefit perks where, book reviewers take a little more attention or whatever. And it's a more, like, it's a Wild West monster hunt. It's a Weird West book, but it's got some literary turns where they just want it to be kind of perceived a little bit differently than like romance, sexy times, vampires, kids killing people. And then this book is kind of a little bit more thoughtful, I guess. So I chose the pen name Lila is because if you yell it, I'll look up. It sounds like the end of Delilah.
Right.
And I'm very lazy. And then Bowen is just kind of like an old family name that I liked. And it sounded very Western.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it really does. It fits the whole premise very well. But so we come to that then. Can you tell us about the premise of this one? And this is the first of 4 in the Shadow series, which I have the others downstairs, but
I'm so glad you have them. We have all of our books are packed up because we just moved and we're renting right now. So you can see there's nothing on the wall. There's no books. There's an Ewok. There's 2 Ewoks. That's
there we go. There we go. And those will become important shortly.
Wake of Vultures, I came up with the idea. I was trail riding a lot when I lived up in Dahlonega. And one night we were having a Twitter conversation about Lonesome Dove. And I was like, oh man, I love Lonesome Dove so much. And, people talk about what they do and don't like. And I was like, I just hate how you can't be a woman in Lonesome Dove unless you are a martyr, a whore, or bug nuts crazy. Those are the only 3 places for women in that world. And I was like, that sucks. And I was like, okay, well, what if I wrote a book about a woman who, really found her feet and kicked everybody else's butt? So yeah, Nettie Lonesome starts out, I was trying to think like, what person would be the most challenged by this world, who would start at like the very hardest setting, like they're not on easy, they're on like super extra ultra murder hard, and would still be able to rise to the top. So that's where Nettie Lonesome came from.
And that is a fabulous, a fabulous series. I mean, it can be dubbed. I've always thought of it as historical urban fantasy.
Yeah, because the setting, like the place it takes in like an 1850s alt Texas, and the setting is almost a character, and its harshness and its grit.
And and then it also does fit the weird Western oeuvre as well, and just a fun. And as I recall, Wake of Vultures also won an award, did it not?
It did. It won a couple of RT awards. I think Book of the Month, and then maybe a Fantasy of the Year.
I just happen to have a list right here. Let's see. Oh, this one. That one doesn't say, but there's a different one that might say.
But it's like they redid the cover. It had such good blurbs and it got so many stars, so many starred reviews that they redid the cover to kind of show that.
I mean, and it's when I read it, back when it first came out, or probably just prior to, I thought, okay, this is my favorite of your books so far. That was, that was the way that I felt about that one. I mean, I have soft spots for all of them and for some in particular, but this one I think will always stand out. And I think, people should really check it out if they are into that sort of, the Western historical urban fantasy. Go for it.
Now, my husband tells me that my first few books, I wasn't quite putting my heart in it. I wasn't trying to hurt people. I was kind of telling fun escapes because I was home with 2 very small children. All I wanted was to have fantastic escapes. And then kind of with Wake of Vultures, it happened around the time that my dad's cancer came back and he kind of went into hospice. So that was when I broke my back and had my first panic attacks. So like that was kind of a year that a lot of things happened. So it had more
it had more of the real world feel to it.
Yeah, it wasn't as much of a like, let's go on a fun island escape. It was like, let's rip your heart out on a fun island escape.
Right. And that's the thing. I mean, a lot of in that series, there is a lot of humor as well, which most of your books include. So
can't write without humor.
Yeah, and it's it's almost a necessity for if I'm going to be picking up one of your books, I pretty much expect it. So just so that people know what to expect, but it's something that it's a fun escape, but it does have that realistic, real world feel to it as well. Now, around this same time is when you you kind of broke into the comics world, and that so we will there are a lot of those. You have a lot of those that people can look at, but I want to show the first one that I think this was the first one.
Yeah, Lady Castle was
of the which my two oldest grandsons quite enjoy, by the way.
Yay.
And yes, but I keep it here at the house to make sure I can always have easy access. And it's good, it's enjoyable. I found myself completely absorbed too, not just, it's not just for kids, let's put it that way. But can you explain a little bit about how you first kind of broke into comics, I guess you could say, and then how did you, the first one with Lady Castle? I have a couple of other questions regarding.
Yeah, it's a fun story. So I had kind of wanted to break into comics, but comics is weird. With a book, I can tell you the steps to take to get traditionally published, and then being good enough to get there is up to you. But I can tell you the steps to get there. It's replicable. Comics, there's no replicable way. There's no way to, like, I can guarantee that you'll get into comics. It's crazy. And so I was having this problem myself. I just couldn't find a way in. And so I got invited to do a couple of free stories for an anthology with Monkey Brain. And I did those, and oh my God, I had too many panels and too many words, but they were very kind to let me do that for a couple of years. And so then I got to Gen Con 2015, which, as we know, is a gaming convention. And they came up to me and they're like, hey, you write comics, right? And I was like, I've written like 2 free comics that were 6 pages each. And they're like, great, we have a women in comics panel with no women on it, and we need you on it. And I was like, okay. So we get up there, and they found 2 other women, and I guess originally it was like 6 white guys. I think we ended up with 2 white guys, so pretty good. And the person moderating the panel was heavily biased. I think they opened the statement with, he was like, let me just start out by telling you, like, this is not a panel on how women can get into comics. It's about how we can write comics for women. And the whole audience is like, but there was someone from the Mary Sue in the audience who was covering that. I think it was so extensive. He had so many crimes against women in that panel, and people of other cultures, that they did like a two-day expose. I remember at one point being like, buddy, you're a white guy, right? And he got real mad at me. You can read up on that. Like, if you search Delilah S. Dawson, the Mary Sue, and comics, like, you can read the whole thing and see it happen in slow motion. But like the next day, I got an email from an editor at Boom Studios who was like, hey, I heard you wanted to write comics. And I was like, I do actually. Thank you so much for reaching out. So Lady Castle was the first thing that I pitched. It's all based on a line from Monty Python. In Monty Python, they say, strange women lying in ponds, handing out swords is no basis for a system of government. And I was like, well, what if it was?
Right. Yeah, why not? Yeah.
Yes, that's the whole basis for the comic. Is just, we should open up on, this castle, and all of the men have gone off on, to kill the dragon or whatever. And there's nothing but women there. They're doing perfectly fine. And one of the princesses has been locked in a tower and is going slightly crazy. And then the Lady of the Lake shows up with the sword, and the blacksmith's wife is like, oh my God, that's really nice metal. And then she's the king.
And I can show some of the photos from the inside. Here's the sword.
Yep.
You show it.
There's Marinor, the blacksmith's wife. So yeah, she didn't become the king because she wanted power or riches. She was just like, wow, let me look at that, like, metal. Is that meteorite? But it's a cool little world. Like, it's a magical world. So there's harpies and dragons and werewolves and that sort of thing.
A little bit of everything. Now, that one, being involved with that comic led to many others, and you've got your fingers in lots of pies in terms of the comics world, which is great. you Sparrowhawk and Star Pig and Spider-Man and
nothing but compound words. I will only write compound words at this point.
oh, there you go.
Firefly.
Yeah, exactly.
Star Wars.
Yeah, that's
Rick and Morty.
Yeah, and how was the Lady Castle experience kind of your springboard into the others? Is that how it works pretty much? I mean, saying, okay, well, here's somebody who can do this and does such a great job. We'll go see.
Yeah, I was so fortunate. My editor who at Boom Studios, Chris Rosa, who's amazing. He's not with them anymore, but he reached out and he liked Lady Castle. So I pitched Sparrowhawk and he bought Sparrowhawk. I mentioned to them one time, like, hey, I'm really into Adventure Time if you ever need an Adventure Time writer. So I got to do, some issues of Adventure Time. I went to a dinner with another editor and him, and she said she was doing a Labyrinth book. And I was like, oh my God, like Labyrinth is a really big deal to me. So I got to write a Labyrinth story. So yeah, they brought me in for Firefly as well. And then I guess because, the comics and publishing are both pretty small industries. And if you are fast and nice to work with and not a diva, people will typically want to work with you. So as it turned out, when they were writing Star Wars Adventures, they needed a Rose Tico comic, and I was the only person who had read the Last Jedi script at the time, because I had to read the Last Jedi script to write Phasma. So they're like, oh, there's a woman who's read the script and can write comics. So I was kind of like, the only person that Venn diagram met in the center of. So I got to write with them. And then I guess I did well enough that I got to do more Star Wars Adventures and Spider-Man.
Well, that's awesome. And yes, I can vouch for the fact that you're easy to work with. So I completely get that. Now, one question I have about comics before we move on, which you actually made a really good segue to what our next topic is going to be. But I'm curious in terms of the comics in general, or does it vary from series to series? Were you given a concept or a topic and then told to develop it? Or I guess with Lady Castle, it was your idea and you came up with the story and, all on your own. How did it work for some of the others, or does it vary?
Well, for the creator-owned comics, so Lady Castle, Sparrowhawk, and Star Pig, I will basically send like 5 pitches to my editor with, like a title, a hook line, and then maybe a paragraph about how it would go and the scope of the project. And then they'll say, oh, well, I like this one, but if you could incorporate that, we kind of Frankenstein whatever they want. And then we have to work up a full pitch and they send it into their, kind of higher ups and they all decide what to do. So it takes a long time. Like from Lady Castle, from me getting that email asking if I'd like to pitch. And of course, I'm very fast. So I sent my pitches that night. Like I did not want to be forgotten. I wanted to capitalize on that Mary Sue article. It was like 18 months to get the green light. Like it took a really long time. And I think they went a little faster after that when I was a known quantity, but it's definitely, it takes a while. With the IP project, with someone else's property, they basically come to me and ask if I'm interested, and then they tell me their parameters. So,
okay.
As Star Wars would say, okay, like we need a Rose Tico comic that includes her sister set on Dakar. And so then I, send in 3 to 5 pitches for that, same thing. So yeah, it's all about, having lots of ideas and being loosey-goosey with them. And, I also let them know, like, if I'm really attached to one idea, I'm like, this one I'm kind of precious about, because the thing that you learn is if they ask for 5 pitches and you really care about 4 of them, and the 5th one, you're like, yeah, who gives a crap? This is garbage. I just need number 5 to pad it out. They'll choose that one. And you'll be like, they want to write this. So yeah, never send them a pitch you don't want to write, because they will hone in on it.
So it's better to say, look, these are 4 that I feel really strongly about and could do a great job with, instead of giving you fluff, and maybe they'd be happy with just 4.
Well, I mean, I'm also like, ideas are not my problem. I can come up with so many ideas. Like I in the next hour, I could come up with 5 comic ideas that I could write that would be great. Like I'm just not worried about the ideas anymore. So, I mean, it's not like I'm like, one solid gold and the other 4 are garbage. It's just like, sometimes I'll be like,
Right.
Oh, and then another interesting one I wrote with Aaron Mahnke, the creator of the Lore podcast. I recently got to do the Wellington comic. I think the trade paperback came out this week. And that one came about, Aaron and I both had books out with Del Rey in the same year. So we got to go to a lot of the same Comic Cons, and we became friends because when you're having like breakfast and dinner with someone and they're really cool, you become friends with them. And I was waiting on my ride was late for Denver Comic Con, and I was like tweeting, I was like, well, I live in the Denver airport now. And he's like, oh, I'm about to get off the shuttle if you want to come ride with me. And so on the way in together, I got to ride in his car with him. He was like, hey, let me ask you a question. I've got this idea for a comic. What do I do with it? And that became Wellington like a year, 2 years later. So it's this, when they say it like it's who you know, it doesn't mean like, oh, I grew up next to the Kardashians. It means like, I had breakfast with someone, I liked them, we hung out, we had drinks. A year later, we were glad to see each other. We had, a talk, and I tried to help him. And like, that's kind of how things happen.
Yeah, and that one does look fascinating. I do not have that one to show yet, but it did just come out this week, so
yeah,
people can get that one, and it looks as though it's going to be great, or that it is. It's now that it's out. It is.
I'm like looking. I'm like, I thought I had one, but I don't know. Again, this is not a house where I know where things are. I think it's in the other room. But yeah, we just got.
Yeah, I believe it only came out maybe on Friday. Is that last Friday or something?
Very recently.
So now we're going to move into something that is, I know, near and dear to your heart, the Star Wars, which they were fortunate enough to get you, and
they can have me anytime they want me.
And here we have your first full-length book in the Star Wars universe, correct?
Yep.
And so, and I know you had your short story, which I've read, but I couldn't remember which book. I know it was in the back of something, but I couldn't remember which book it was, and I couldn't find it.
I think it's in the back of the Force Awakens paperback, I think.
Well, or maybe I just got it separately. I think I got it as an ebook, and that's probably why I couldn't find a physical copy, but I do have it on either a Kindle or a Nook somewhere. But can you explain how did you kind of get involved with the whole Star Wars universe?
It was black magic.
Okay. Okay.
So my friend Chuck Wendig tweeted that he wanted to write a Star Wars book. And within the year, he had written a Star Wars book. Right. Apparently, we're pretty excited about that. So Aftermath came out. I'm like, oh, that's all I have to do. So I tweeted, I would like to write a Star Wars book, but nobody showed up at my door. So I was at the Delilah Walmart, and back then I could still eat gluten before my gallbladder died. And I saw this lone Star Wars cupcake in the deli with a little Darth Vader ring in it. And so I bought it and I put it in the freezer, and I was like, when I get to write a Star Wars story, I'm going to eat this. And every day I'd open the freezer, I'd be like, make it happen, Vader cupcake. And after about 2 weeks, because I am very weak-willed around cake, I was like, screw it, like totally Cookie Monstered it. And I saved it, put on the ring, and I was like, okay, you can still make this happen, Vader, but that was a good cupcake. And then like 2 weeks later, I got my email.
Yeah, well, it was still, there you go.
Yeah. But to be fair, in the interim, like I had my agent send my books to a Del Rey editor and talk to them. I had 2 or 3 friends who'd written for Star Wars, and I was like, hey, if it ever came up in the topic of conversation, if you could pass on the good word. I talked about it online and had some really nice, support about it. So there was more at work than just, dark Sith magic and a plastic Darth Vader ring.
Right. And a cupcake.
That first email was I got it in Dahlonega. I remember exactly where my car was when we were driving. But I got the email inviting me to write The Perfect Weapon.
Yeah, and I guess the rest is history. If they like what you do, you're easy to work with, good things can happen, right?
I mean, I hope so. Like I've never said no to Star Wars. Let's just put it that way.
Well, and with Phasma, what I find interesting about the book too is that I'm a Star Wars fan. I've always been one, but I'm not. It's hard to say. I'm not like a super fan in terms of I don't know the names of all.
You don't have to be a super fan. Fans is fans.
To appreciate that book, which is a really dystopian origin story. I mean, really.
I call it Mad Max in space.
Yeah. And so from my perspective, I didn't feel as though I was left out of anything by reading, this book, because it's great. And it was very, kind of timely too, in terms of, a lot of things having kind of a, when everyday life can have kind of a dystopian feel. But then you look at this and you're like, oh yeah, but
We're headed right there.
yeah, and not as bad as Parnassus. So, but yes, it was fascinating. And then I have,
Yeah, I'm actively against any kind of gatekeeping and fandom. Like, I want to welcome everybody in. So all of my Star Wars books are written so that if you have seen the movie The Force Awakens, you can read Phasma and feel totally chill. But at the same time, if you've seen every movie 50 times and you've read the EU, you will find all of those little Easter eggs that you want, and you'll see the details you want. I really want to have it both ways. It's super important to me that nobody opens that book and thinks, oh, Star Wars isn't for me. Like, I want you to open the book and be like, oh, cool.
right, and you might even, I mean, it can also be a gateway if somebody
Oh, yeah.
picks it up, and because that is a cool cover as well. I mean, that is, and to get people interested, I would think that would be a good one. Now this is a combination, because it's the Star Wars, but it's also a comic. And Finley doesn't know that he's getting this for Christmas, so I snagged it, and he's going to be so excited. But anyway, so this is one of those, and so once again, and then this book's really heavy, but I'm gonna pick it up and hold it up. This one,
Oh, my big chunky baby.
yes, which the Skywalker Saga, which basically is a summary of all the movies, right up until right before, because it came out right before the last movie.
Yeah, it's meant to be like a fairy tale retelling that would read out loud really well to a kid and be,
Right.
engaging and fast, but also have the heart of the movies.
Right. And again, the 11-year-old grandson, when he's over here, that's, he gets it off the shelf and just sits there and goes through it. So he's very excited about it. And it's a beautiful book. So
Oh yeah, the art in there is incredible.
and that one came around, and you've also had some others. You've got the Black Spires, is that right?
Yeah.
And that the Galaxy's Edge one, so that came out just last year, right, in
2019.
So
which feels like it was 10 years ago.
yeah, it does. It does pretty much. Now, do you feel as though, or do you hope that this that you'll be doing this more, that you'll stay engaged in the Star Wars universe?
Oh yeah, no, Star Wars for life. I love the editors. I love hanging out with other Star Wars authors. I like any project that they would offer me. I think I could find a way to make it a Delilah S. Dawson book and really have a great time with it. It's anytime I get to write canon, it's such a privilege, and I love it so much.
Okay. Well, good. Well, we all will keep our fingers crossed that that happens.
It is killing me though. Like my family, we've lived in Florida for the last 3 or 4 years, and every Christmas, instead of doing a whole bunch of presents, we just go to Disney World. And it's killing me this year, like not being able to go to Batu and see Baimarati, and like it's become like I'm grieving kind of like the loss of that experience. I don't know. It's like it's my baby over there. I spent so much time in Batu, and yeah.
Well, and look at it this way, I guess, is that it'll mean that much more once you can do it again.
That's true.
Even though it's considerably further away now, it's still.
Oh, Craig and I are both like, once we're vaccinated, we're gonna be like, Mommy and Dad, you have to go to work for a week, so we'll be back in 4 days. Like, it's important work somewhere, and then we're gonna be like on the plane.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that. Now, next we're gonna go to this fun series, the Pell series, of which this is the first, and the Kill the Farm Boy. And the especially interesting thing about this one, well, there are a lot of interesting things about it, but the difference, I guess, with this is that you actually wrote it with someone else. It wasn't just you. Now, worked with other people on comics, obviously, because they're actually drawing the comics, although you're an artist as well. So
Not
um,
in comics. That is, they do all the heavy
that's
lifting.
different. Yeah,
I could not do what comic artists do.
yeah, I understand what you mean. Um, so tell us a little bit about this series and how did the concept kind of develop between you and Kevin? And I'm also curious about the process. I heard a little bit about it um, when you guys went on tour for this book for
Yeah.
Killer Boy, but some of our viewers may not have heard about this before. So
About
please
the what?
about the process and
Oh, sure.
how you guys did it.
Yeah. So Kevin Hearn is one of the best human beings on this planet and one of my very best friends and a true joy. So if you haven't read his Hounded series, the Iron Druid Chronicles, if you haven't read his Plague of Giants series, like get on that. They're all amazing and he's a super good dude. So yeah, we went to, I think, Dallas. We were invited to do a book signing with Charlene Harris and the late Rachel Kane
Oh,
and
yeah.
Wells and some other friends. It was pretty rad because Charlene Harris is just one of my heroes, like I said, and Rachel Kane is one of my heroes, and Jay Wells is super awesome. So we went up there and stayed at Jay's house, and we did this amazing event. And we went to like a really nice dinner, and it was just one of those like wonderful weekends where you realize right now how much you miss people.
Right, right, yeah.
On the way back, we were in the airport, and we hadn't had barbecues. We'd asked people like, where should we go to get airport barbecue? And they're like, oh, you have to go to this place. And that place was closed. So we had to go to the secondary place, and it was not good. Like we were both like, well, I guess this is better than starving to death. But it was not good. We were sitting there, Kevin was like, hey, homie, I had this idea about doing an anthology called Kill the Farm Boy, where we get a whole bunch of writers together and everybody tells a story where they set up the chosen one and then kill him. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. And then we were like, well, wait, but what if we did everybody chose a different trope? And I was like, okay, I get chainmail bikini. And, but we made this list of all these different tropes and this list of all these writers we wanted to work with. And we started to get this anthology going. And then we were both like, oh, this is a lot of work. We're going to spend all of our time answering emails and doing royalty reports. And it just sounded really icky to us. So we kind of put it to the side. And a couple of months later, I emailed Kevin back and was like, hey, homie, what if you and I wrote it? And then we split the profits, half the book, twice the money.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So that's what we did. And it was really fun because we didn't take it too seriously. It wasn't like we, sat down in a library corral and we're like, okay, here's what we're going to do. It was like, Kevin was like, oh, I had a good idea. So I wrote this first chapter. What do you think? And I was like, oh man, buddy, that's the best. What if we did this? And we just we kind of came up randomly with characters and traded the chapters. So that's how we wrote it. Was he would write a chapter, send it to me. I would read it, make comments about how funny it was, add jokes, correct stuff if stuff needed correcting, and then write my chapter and send it back. Then he would, look at his chapter and agree or disagree with the edits, then go through my chapter and oh, buddy, this is great, but what if we did this? And so it was like this kind of blending braid. So by the time we were done, we had basically a second draft.
Yeah, right.
And
you get
a very loose outline. It wasn't like we were just writing on the fly. Like the chapter headings were, we were like, okay, well, we need 30 chapters, and about here's where the climax will be. So we had some idea, but when you got a chapter back, like all I would know is the chapter would be like, in which our characters meet a giant and are almost eaten. And like I had no idea he was going to come up with Old Factory the giant, who's obsessed with pickles. Like it was such a joy. And so we both, because it was so different and it was so silly, like we were both writing our very serious on deadline books, and then we get the chapter and we're like, oh my god, I got the chapter.
yeah, I can understand it would be a nice distraction. And am I to understand you guys, after 3 books in the series, you guys are still friends, so that's a good thing.
Oh, yeah. No, I've heard some horror stories about co-writing with other writers, and I have a list of tips for people who want to co-write, but it's just, we're both so cheerful and easygoing, and nobody had any like, well, this is my character, so only I can write Theo. We were both very kind of giving. We only had like one incident the whole time that we had a disagreement on. It was in the 3rd book, and it was a concept where Kevin had kind of a specific story in mind, and I he thought I was going to turn right and I turned left, and he got it, and he was just like, oh, buddy, I was hoping we would do the such and such. And I was like, that's cool. You can totally rewrite that chapter, like rewrite it however you want, and then I'll just pick up after that. And he's like, oh, okay. So he took the chapter, rewrote it his way, and then we just kind of kept going. Because if you don't have, I mean, I don't want to say like I didn't have skin in the game, because like we both care about the series, but we were both very careful to not get super attached. So, I'd rather be friends with Kevin than have chapter 27 be exactly the way I wanted it. Like, I don't care.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And plus, I'm sure that when you're doing that kind of a collaboration, you have to step outside of yourself and kind of see things from the other person's perspective sometimes, and not just from your own. Whereas when it's your book, alone, then it's a different story. So
we were also like, we weren't trying to make it a Delilah book or a Kevin book. We were kind of trying to do this kind of unified front thing. So, kind of the goal is that by the end, when we turn it into the editor, she shouldn't be able to tell who wrote which chapter or who introduced or came up with each character. Like, that was our goal. And
and I will say, I think you pulled that off, because when I was reading it, I was kind of like, okay, can I really tell? Every once in a while, I was thinking, well, maybe, and then I'm like, I don't know, it could be either one of them on this one. So you did manage to pull that off, and it's something that I think, I know you were playing with fantasy tropes and doing all that, but you
lovingly flipping fantasy tropes,
right, and flipping them in for real. But one of the things that I thought was really cool too is that you did it through a lens that people would be familiar with, in terms of, some of the fairy tales, some folklore, and there's even the whole goblin market thing reminded me of the Wizard of Oz. And so, rightly or wrongly, I don't know, but that's what it reminded me of. And so, and I thought, well, okay, that's a great way to get people engaged too. I mean, because if they've got some background, they say, oh, I recognize that, or it makes it even funnier. I mean, to be honest, it makes it even more amusing. So I got to ask, and I know this has got to be a hard one. I know it's a hard one for any author, but especially since you have written so many different things. Do you have a favorite main character from any of your books, or from any of your, from each series? Even if you can't narrow it down to just one or two people, you can do a few.
I mean, my favorite character is always whichever one I'm writing.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people say
at the time. But I mean, Criminy Stain, that kicked off the whole thing, and Wicked as They Come, like, he came to me in a dream. I'm not a person that things come to in dreams. This was like a once in a lifetime thing, but I had this weird dream. I'd been binging Buffy, and it was in that period of time, like right when you're about to wake up, that I woke up naked on a rock slab in the middle of a birch forest, and I look over, and this super attractive guy in like full Victorian dress, wearing a top hat with long dark hair, spoke to me just like Spike. And I was like, Spike from Buffy, and I was just like, I want to hang out with this guy forever. And so I was like, I'll write a book about him.
Yeah, there you go.
Very like, I love him. And I mean, I love all of them, but that's, I guess you have a soft spot for the first character that was that real to me. Because looking back at that book, if I was able to rewrite it now, I would say that maybe the heroine was not my best character ever. She wasn't as fully dimensional as I can write them now. But Criminy Stain was himself from page one. It's like writing Han Solo. Like, when I write words for Han Solo, they don't get changed, because that's how Han Solo talks. And Criminy Stain is the same. I just know him that well.
Right. And just to illustrate, I'll just show the cover one more time. So yes, I
got the cover comp for that one. Early authors often don't have any say in their covers in traditional publishing. I have a lot more control now. Back then I didn't, because they don't know if you are crazy, and some people are. And that's a diminishing way, but I mean in a way that people will be like, oh, his eyes are a millimeter too far apart. We're going to need to change that. But when they first gave me the cover, he was the picture of that guy. He was super dark tan and oiled up. He was like really buff, and he was like super wide and muscular. And I was like, this guy is described as like super slender and wiry and pale, and it's like I described an Edward and you gave me a Jacob.
Right, right. That's a good way to put it.
They were able to like, I guess they like photoshopped him in a little bit. And I was like, it's not that I'm being picky. It's that like, if a woman picks up this book because she wants a beefy werewolf alpha and she finds a cunning, sneaky weasel Spike, is, like, I feel like that's false advertising. Cause like people who pick up those books, like, if you want, an alpha or a villain, like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it does reflect the book. And all of the covers for that series do a nice job of, reflecting a lot of what the story is.
The funniest one, so the first cover I had no say in. The second cover I had no say in. The third one I knew I had was like, so is the same guy doing the cover? And they were like, yes, he is. So I like emailed them. I was like, hey, I just want to tell you, I love these covers and I'm so excited. And if you have any questions about the third, I know sometimes the publishers don't give you the full info. Like, I'd love to tell you. And so he wrote back, he's like, oh, thank you so much. I heard that the main character looks like Ryan Reynolds. So I'm looking for that, an actor like that. And I was like, no, he talks like Ryan Reynolds. He looks like Jesse Williams. He is a man of color with light green eyes, like very, like, please do not put Ryan Reynolds on the cover of this book. And like, thank God I stepped in or we would have had Ryan Reynolds.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, and that,
who the character is.
right. And let's see. I've got that one down here too, but it tipped, oh, here it is. I told you there was a big stack. So yeah, I mean, that reflects the character as opposed to what you, yeah.
Also,
Because Ryan Reynolds,
really like Jesse Williams at the time, so she was on board.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Now, do you have what of the secondary characters that from any of your books was actually the most fun? And it could be more than one person if you want. But I mean, who did you end up just being able to have a good time with?
I mean, the crew from Wake of Vultures, Coyote Dan, Winifred, and the donkey, like, they were very fun. That's the book where I realized, like, I really need to torture these characters and I need to invent secondary characters that challenge and annoy them versus just support them and be kind. So that was my first thing where it was like, you gonna hate these people. Like, they're gonna be your found family and you're gonna love them, but at first you're gonna hate them.
First things first.
Yeah.
Yes.
But also, I mean, it's like in Star Wars books, I love Pook the robot from Black Spire. I love getting to ride a droid.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. I'm sure that is a very different experience because you're having to, you're supposed to be writing something that's sophisticated machine, and yet it's not the same thing as a human. So,
well, that's the cool thing about Star Wars. As you get deep into it, you realize that the droids have personalities, and a lot of them are very much themselves, and that they just get real tired of human beings crap. Like, so Pook is very like, he's kind of got some Marvin the Martian in there, crossed with Severus Snape, basically.
Oh, okay. That's a good combination.
When they were doing the audiobook, they're like, what does Pook sound like? And I was like, he sounds like Snape, just like, Potter, turn to page 274, kill me.
Well, that's there you go, folks. If you're looking for fun with a bot, go for it, right? Do you have one of your books that kind of gave you trouble in terms of, just in terms in the creative writing process that was actually a bit more of a challenge to get through than any of the others?
Yeah, so Servants of the Storm, I wrote in under 3 weeks. It was a super fast,
Wow.
super first draft. I wasn't sleeping a lot back then. I had little kids, so I wasn't sleeping much. And it was just very like, oh, I'm possessed, And so my agent was able to sell it, and I got this edit letter from my editor. And I mean, I don't know, edit letters are like a double stuffed Oreo with this much stuff in them. So it's like, oh, we love your book. We can't wait. It's so amazing. Here's all the stuff that needs to be amazing. We can't wait. You're amazing. And you're just like, oh God. And that one was 14 pages, single spaced. I printed it out. But it was really daunting. And when it came down to was, what are the mechanics of this world and the magic system? Because it all sounds cool, but it doesn't work. And they're like, how does this work? And I was like, it sounds cool. I didn't know. And so the edit letter basically was asking me to clarify this. in the book. And normally I'm very fast. Like I write books in under 3 months. I edit them in generally about 2 weeks. Like I'm pretty fast. This edit just, it killed me. I couldn't get it and I would get so upset. And like one night I had like 2 weeks left on this edit and I couldn't make any headway. I didn't know how to do what they wanted. And I cried. And I was just like, I don't know how to fix this. It's just broken. And that night I had this dream. And when I woke up, I knew how to fix the book. And so I had to like rebuild, I had to build this magic system. I had to make everything make sense. And I got it done. But like there was just this night where I was like, I'm going to have to give back my advance and withdraw this contract because I can't fix this book. And I don't know how. And then I figured it out.
Wow, talk about being up against the wall and not having a choice, and then all of a sudden it came to you, right? So that's
Well, what's
great.
funny is like I was so young in my career. I mean, you have to understand this was at that
Oh
point my
yeah,
like, second or third published book. You know, I was writing it about the same time as Wicked as She Wants. But today I would first like I would reach out to my agent and be like, hey, what do you like I talked to my agent, I would talk to my editors, like I would have conversations with people. I have so many tools in my toolkit right now for when I get stuck.
right.
Like go by water, get in the water, get in a bathtub, like meditate, do some yoga, ask my husband to fix it, and then I'll tell him how wrong he is and figure out the answer. I don't have any of these tools yet. So I was just laying there going, will it what, will it just fix itself if I wait long enough? But yeah, I learned so much.
Yeah, well, and those are all good points. I mean, that the fact that you were so early in your career that you didn't have the same kind of resources that you do now, or at least you didn't know how to make use of them
Oh
either.
yeah, I was terrified. I was like, if I email my agent too much, she'll think I'm needy and she'll cut me off. And you're like, no, your agent would much rather you ask questions than sit at home being terrified. Like nobody, you're not gonna be a great writer if you're terrified. Like just ask.
Yeah, although we got to admit that being terrified during the writing of that book kind of fits. So anyway, if it,
Being
now,
terrified reading it is good. Being terrified editing it, not so
right, right, this is true. That's a very distinct difference. Now, kind of on the other end, do you have a favorite of one of your books? It's kind of
good.
just for whatever reason.
I have one coming out next year, or 2022. It's a big one. It's called The Violence. And it is like a generational saga of a grandmother, mother, and daughter dealing with internalized trauma as they live through a plague of random violence. I went pretty deep into kind of my growing up, and I went kind of deep into what women face today, and I kind of had to go deep into what it would look like if we had another kind of plague. So that one, I think it's going to be like my big girl book.
Right, right.
It's a lot
So
more serious than the other things I've done, and it's got some big stuff in it. So that one I'm really looking forward to. But every book, I was completely in love with it when I wrote it, and completely alive with it. And when I start talking about them, I can just fall in love with them all over again. But I think probably so far for a book that's out, you could read like Wake of Vultures. I think takes it has the escape, the adventure, it has the campiness, it has the heartbreak, it has the monsters, the horror, the beauty. Like it just has. It seems like all of the ingredients,
right.
all of my books have, but you take them here and there, and that one seems to have all of them. So that's probably right now the one that's the most me.
Okay. Well, it's one of my personal favorites as well. Um, now, at this point in time, you've written almost as many novellas and short stories as you have, full-length novels. You've written so many, and you must enjoy doing those to a certain extent. And what is your difference in approach when you're coming up on when you sit down to say, okay, I'm going to write this novella set in the blood universe, or a short story set in Star Wars or whatever. How do you what's the difference in approach for you, or is there one?
Well, in general, I don't write shorter form unless someone has commissioned it and wants it. Those aren't things I just kind of come up with on my own usually, because they're harder to sell, and it makes more sense for me to put all of my money into a book, or all my brain into a book and then sell that
Right,
versus,
right.
hey, will you buy the $600 short story? Like, I want to go for the bigger jackpot. So it's all commission. So the first thing I have to do is look at, what they want, what they're asking for, the scope of the project. If it's IP, there's going to be a lot more specifics. If it's just any short story or a blood short story, so I have to look at what they're trying to accomplish, what I want to accomplish. But with books, it's like I always either start with a character, a world, or a hook. And then I have to build out that little triangle with character, world, and hook. And it all has to be perfectly balanced. With short stories, I usually come out with like the twist is the thing that I come up with first, is the little aha moment. Short stories for me, either have to have an aha moment, or if they're like, say, in a blood story or whatever, I've got to figure out like the climax first, and then work backwards. But it's all about that little light bulb moment. And how to get there as quickly as possible. Like you don't have that time for setup. Most short stories are for like 5,000 to 10,000 words, but most around 5,000 to 6,000, I guess. So, it's 1/20th of a book. You got to get there a lot faster.
Right.
But I write a short story in a day or two, pretty much. It happens super fast because they're very self-contained. And then it's about, smoothing them out.
Gotcha. Okay. And this is sort of a craft question as well. Do you like quiet when you write, or do you prefer having some kind, do you need to have some kind of background noise, whether it's music or something playing in the background? I've heard different responses, but I'm just curious about that.
This used to be, my answer to this has changed, because I used to have music. So like all of my playlists on Spotify, I have a playlist for like almost every book. So just songs that feel like the book, so that, when I'm driving and listening to the playlist, it kind of gets in my head. I've had to change that since the pandemic. I can't, I don't really drive a lot because there's nowhere to go. I'm traveling. So, I used to I get a lot done in airports and on airplanes. I'm not doing that anymore. And my entire family is home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So quiet doesn't exist.
Right.
So I've kind of learned to catch as catch can, grab my time. Even the room that's my office now has 4 sets of glass doors. So I can't even escape. So a lot less precious. And what I've learned over the years is like, the more precious you get about your process, the more of a little box you put yourself into, and the more kind of excuses you have to not write. Oh, well, like I don't have, my earbuds are broken, so I can't write today. Well, I can't go to the coffee shop, so I can't write today. Like, if you just get to where you can write anywhere, like nothing can stop you. So I can write anywhere pretty much. So yeah, now it's just, hopefully everybody is watching TV or playing a video game or something, and I come in here and I have a little Post-it note I put up on the door that says, writing, and hopefully no one will catch fire and bother me.
Yeah, I like that. Hopefully, and catch fire is the first place you go. That's a good idea.
Well, you shouldn't bother me when I'm writing unless you're literally on fire or dripping blood.
That's right. If there's no flame or blood, then don't bother you. Okay.
But also to be fair, my children are 12 and 14. Like, this is not the rules we had when they were like 1 and 2.
Yeah, 12 and 14. That's an interesting combination there. So now, can you tell us, is there anything that you personally have read and enjoyed lately?
Lately, the books that I've read and enjoyed have been for blurbs, so you won't be able to read them for a year or two.
Oh, okay. Well, that's true. Yeah, you get it.
E.K. Johnston's Etherbound is going to be great. Michelle Ruiz Keel's Summer of Roses is going to be great. Super looking forward to those. Mike Chen's We Could Be Heroes is out very shortly. It's great. But right now I'm writing a middle grade book. So whatever I'm writing, whatever I tend to read for pleasure is like as far away as I can get from what I'm writing. So now that I'm writing a middle grade adventure, I am reading like psychological thrillers.
Oh, okay.
I don't even really know who wrote them or what their names on. I'm just like, did something terrible happen to a woman? Let's read that.
Oh yeah, how exciting. Well, and that was going to be my final question for you, is what's next? And you spoke a little bit about the violence, and one question I have about that, which I can't wait for. Well, I mean, I can because I have to, but I'm excited for it. But also, did you start that before the pandemic? Did you start the actual writing of it prior to the
Yeah,
pandemic?
I started that in Seattle Comic-Con of 2019. At Seattle
Okay,
Comic-Con, I had the idea for it.
so
I
yeah,
notes that I took. So yeah, that's my first book that I sold on spec, meaning normally I write the entire book and then we attempt to sell that. But that one I wrote like 20,000 words in an outline and we sold it that way. So I still had to write the whole book, which is funny because I had the idea and sold the book before the pandemic. So like in January of 2019. And then when it came to write it, it was March 2020.
oh gosh, yeah,
A lot happened between the sale of that book and when I started writing it. So I had to kind of, and probably when I go to edit it, I'll edit it in January. I will probably have to make some changes just to reflect our, because when I was writing last March, I was like, oh, we're gonna handle this. We're gonna be through with this by July. We'll know how to. I wasn't gonna be like, oh, we're gonna be idiots.
right, exactly.
I wanted to be like, I don't want the vaccine. Like,
Right.
so yeah.
So you've it was a combination of being kind of prescient and now saying, well, why did I have to predict the future so
Oh
clearly?
no, I mean with
Uh,
violence, basically it's more like it's mosquito borne, and when you get it, it's like being rabid. Like you go, nobody's there, and you murder whoever's nearest you with your bare hands, and then you snap out of it, and you just like go back to shopping.
oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's different than this one.
Yeah, that's going to be very interesting. And you talked about and the middle grade book,
Yeah.
and I had seen reference to that somewhere, but can you tell us a little bit about that one and what the premise is there and when
Sure.
we can expect it?
Out in September of 2021. The book is called Mine. And it is my Florida haunted house love story to Florida, basically, because my daughter and I would take care of our neighbors' cats when they were out of town, and their house is unlike every house around. Like Florida houses are like they're like squatty brick poop houses. Like they have to be hurricane sturdy.
Mhm.
They're solid stucco, and they have little windows, and they're just like I dare you to. I'm a toad. They're toad houses. And my neighbor's house was like a hobbit house. It was like wood and slanty and this very long, weird roof and big wide windows. And it was like, this place is and we would get lost every time we went in it. Like it was only like a 3-bedroom house, but we'd walk in and be like, where's the cats that we have to, where's the food? How did we end up in the laundry room? And I was like, oh, if this place was haunted and a hoarder's house, like where you couldn't see where you were going, it'd be terrifying. And they have like this little rickety dock that like every time you step on it, you think it's gonna fall under you. They have like this weird like bird feeder graveyard. It's amazing. And so that's what inspired the book. It's about a theater kid who moves into an abandoned hoarder's house.
Okay, okay. And this is a middle grades approach, which is different for you, other than the comics, than some of your comics. But so that must be a somewhat different experience as well.
I mean, it's you get to skip out on so much of the junk you have to put in YA and adult. Like you can just kind of have the adventure without the like, oh no, does he love me or doesn't he love me? I don't know. It's just like, yeah, this is a ghost story. But that book, I told you in Wake of Vultures, I broke my back while I was writing that.
Right.
So some of it was done on Percocet with a broken back. You remember the little thing I had
Oh
to wear.
yeah,
I
do.
But so while I was writing Mine, I pinched a nerve, which is not nearly as exciting as getting bucked off a horse and breaking your back, but like I couldn't move. My
Oh
my
my gosh.
numb. So a lot of that book, I'm lying on my back on top of like 2 different heating pads, and I had this kind of bamboo stand that my laptop was like taped to. So I'm typing like this because I couldn't move my arms. It was like T-Rex upside down, backwards typing. It's like some of that book, I was in so much pain, I had to dictate. So I was using like Google Speak, where I was like, she went to the door. Like, so that one was fun to write. Like you're trying to write a book about this like carefree 13-year-old and you're like this broken old lady body where you're having to contort to write. So that was fun.
Oh my. Oh yeah, you've had quite some experiences when you've been doing your creative work, and it's amazing. So kudos to you for pressing forward during some of those adversities. My goodness. But
Well,
it's
pain makes it way, like if you read like Black Spire, I was working on that one when I was in pain too. So like there's stuff in there. Like in Star Wars, I felt like we're writing actively about like active soldiers and veterans. And it's like a 45-year-old man gets punched into the wall 20 feet away, slides down the wall onto his back and gets up and walks away. And you're like, no, like you couldn't walk after that. You'd be in a lot of pain. You'd have trauma. You'd have nightmares. So, like in Black Spire, like you see these characters like dealing with their trauma as military vets.
right, right. Well, it's amazing that you can do it anyway, even if, I mean, I understand that it probably serves as somewhat of a distraction too
Oh, yeah.
from the pain, but at the same time, it had to have been very difficult. But I speak on behalf of all of your readers by saying that we're very glad that you have managed to power through all of that and come up with such great stuff. And it's you've created so many different works in a relatively short period of time, and you have a lot to be proud of. And it's, I mean, and they're all quality works. It's not as though you're just tossing them off. So congratulations and thank you, I should say.
Thank
And
you for reading everything I've ever written. It's
well,
really,
there you go. You're quite welcome.
you and Rocky are the only people who have probably pulled off that hat trick.
Oh, there you go. Yes, and he will likely watch this once it's posted, because he watches all of these. So we get a nice Rocky shout out, as there should be. And thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate you taking time out of your day to sit down with me and answer a whole slew of questions.
Well, the only payback is the next time we have a Dragon Con, you have to invite me. So
there you go. Well, I don't think that'll be an issue. I think I think that will work out just fine. And whatever form Dragon Con takes, we will see how. We certainly hope to be in person, and we'll see how it goes. But even if not, we can continue to do these sorts of things, which, people are being creative during the pandemic, right? So we do the best we can. But thank you so much, Delilah. And I will, include your information where people can find you online, in the description of this interview. So on the YouTube channel. And again, thank you for doing this. Thank you for being you and for creating such great stuff. I mean, I know I speak for all of your fans when I say that, and certainly for myself and my grandchildren who are coming to appreciate your work as well. So we got to keep that rolling. I've got the perfect audience for mine. So
here we go. I will terrify your grandchildren.
That's right. Well, you mentioned the Blood Bunny, and I have the Blood Bunny, the thing that I actually won at your first release party, and I forgot to bring it with me upstairs. I'm upstairs, and the Blood Bunny's downstairs. But one of the grandchildren, several years ago, when he first saw it, he said, "Grandma, there's a spot." And I said, "Oh, that's supposed to be there." And I said, "Do you remember my friend Delilah that you met at the books?" And then they were like, "Oh, okay." Yeah.
Tiny hat.
The tiny hats, yes. And then after I said that's who it was, they were like, "Oh, okay." Then they got it. In any case, thank you so much. And I appreciate you being here. Thanks to everyone who will get to see this. We appreciate all of you as well. And have a wonderful rest of your day, Delilah. And thank you for voting.
Good to talk to you.
Yes, same here. It's wonderful to see you. Thanks again.